First decision of the morning. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or will we ease into the day with a sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel. Ooh, what about that white chocolate mocha? No matter which flavor you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Better coffee starts a better day. Start with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Hey there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
I'm Arthur.
And we are, halfway through the month of February?
Yeah, more.
Now? Something like that? I don't know.
It's still cold, so I don't know. Everything feels the same.
God, seriously. And in that spirit...
Aha, nice segue.
We decided on our topic for today, which is basically getting into the idea of winter horror, so winter set horror stories, and kind of obviously talking about different ones that we've read at different times and stuff like that, and how a lot of the themes from them tend to reoccur, and maybe how we feel about them as well, and questioning a little bit when do we read winter horror? Do we read it in the winter? Do we read it at other times of year? Who knows?
I don't know. I feel like it's only in the winter. I don't know. Why would you want to throw yourself into a snowy landscape in the middle of the summer?
I know. No, it's true. I have a tendency, sometimes if, some novels obviously take place over an entire year or multiple years, so sometimes, there is mention of things, but I do, if they're specifically set at one time of year, I have a tendency to pick them at the time of year in which I feel that I can relate to them the most. So it's January, February, when it's horrible and cold and snowy outside, and you yourself feel stuck.
Yeah. It just adds to the atmosphere.
Yeah,
right?
the same way that the characters do.
Yeah.
That's it. Because, I find that, it's... I don't know. I think winter set stories are, a really smart, particularly, in, the horror sphere. I find that they're, a really smart choice to make, because oftentimes, and this is something that you see that reoccurs in a lot of them, they add to, the sense of, isolation that maybe characters are feeling, because... maybe they are stuck somewhere, or maybe they are stuck inside somewhere because they can't go anywhere because of either a snowstorm or severe cold in some way, or the severe cold is what keeps them from being able to accomplish something.
Exactly.
Whatever, different kinds of obstacles are put in the way of the characters, the atmosphere and the weather can contribute to that quite a bit.
Well, yeah, that's it, because it sets a setting, right? And then you can kind of do a lot of stuff with it, right? Think if you're stuck and you can't leave, or if you leave you will probably die. It adds to the kind of the you said, the isolation, but also in some cases I guess the claustrophobia of it, of just the general environment of things, so that's already one thing, and then you add the extra whatever horror element to it, and then here we go, that's a whole other story that's going on.
Yeah, because so often horror itself relies on a sense of anxiety or desperation or isolation or something of its characters in order to create a tense atmosphere. And I feel the addition of winter conditions only adds to that.
Exactly.
So it
in a good way.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. There are so many different I don't know. Okay, do you like winter horror? I feel we should start with that, actually. How do you feel about stories that you've read that are thrillers, horror, in that sphere, but set during the winter months?
Yeah, look, in general, yes.
Yeah.
Not necessarily something that I would specifically go and seek out during winter. If there's something that I am reading that is that, I will pick it up. If it's happening during a different time, I remember when I read Misery, I believe it was spring or something a long time ago, still very interesting, right? It was still worthy of a read, despite the fact that it wasn't in the winter that I was reading it.
Sure.
It would be interesting to reread it, maybe on a cold winter night when it's snowed in and everything, see kind of if it gives a different vibe to it,
if it adds to that level of claustrophobia, because that's definitely something that's pretty prevalent in that story.
Exactly.
So.
No, but I do like it in general. And I can relate considering we live in Canada. So
yeah, that's it. I think there's probably like a big caveat to that too. I would be so curious to know, like, for people who live in climates maybe where you just don't get very much snow on a regular basis, if this is something that like you cannot relate to in any capacity, so it's difficult to read, or if you find it fascinating because it's so different than what you're accustomed to, and that maybe is like what draws you into the story as well. But that's an interesting thought, because there are so many parts of even North America, let alone anywhere else in the world, where, snowfall is not a regular thing. And I know we've seen like some changes to that more recently, like even this winter with like areas of like Florida and the Carolinas and stuff getting snow for the first time in decades and everything, because global warming is going to do what global warming's doing, and things are changing over time.
Like an inch or two, and it's just like the city's shut down.
Yes, absolutely. Well, because if you think about it, right, like we have such an infrastructure in place here for these sorts of things, but when you go outside of that sphere, you realize that in so many other places in the world, you're like, oh right, people don't use snow tires here, and they don't have cleanup crews and city crews in place with mounds and mounds of snow plows, and people who do this for a living literally spend their time like cleaning up, like we live in like a condo complex for instance, right? And we have a company that is paid to come and do snow removal in the parking lots and on the sidewalks and the walking paths and stuff that connect all of the buildings together, and that's just not something that people in other places have to really worry about. So I could see that, like, with the snowfalls that we get here, it would definitely incapacitate the city if we didn't already have an infrastructure in place for it, Anyway, okay. Examples, because there are so many. Oh. And when I started looking into it, I realized actually that I've read pretty much all of the ones, almost all of the ones on this list, I should say, not all of them, but I've read quite a few of the books on this list at different times, and so it really speaks to me that I'm like, oh wow, I've read a lot of winter horror, because I guess just I'm Canadian and that's what we do, I don't know. So obviously, okay, like in terms of like major ones, you've got novels like The Shining.
Yeah, that's like the first thing I think people would think of.
I'm pretty sure, I think a lot of people probably think of Stephen King in general because of The Shining and because of Misery.
Yes.
Both of those are very snow set specific books, and the weather plays very heavily into the characters being stuck in the situation that they're in.
Exactly, and they can't leave, and that extenuates what happens to them essentially.
Exactly.
Because of that. Exactly. Because they can't leave. Yeah. There's more crazy stuff that happens to them.
Yeah. So briefly, just like that's an overview. Basically, The Shining follows Jack Torrance, his wife, and their son, Danny, who he takes a job as a caretaker at the Overlook Hotel, which is a hotel up like way up in the mountains, that essentially closes over the winter months because it becomes so snow laden that it's impossible to reach it or to leave the hotel, but someone needs to still be on site to keep the place running and make sure nothing goes wrong, of course. So he takes this job because he's lost previous positions and things, and is struggling with like an addiction issue and stuff. And of course, like obviously the entire novel is more of a metaphor for addiction and for a man struggling with his own demons and how those demons may manifest themselves, in himself and his own fear around this. And Stephen King wrote this in like a semi-autobiographical way because he was obviously a practicing alcoholic at the time that he wrote the novel, and he had a lot of fear around what potentially could happen to him and his family because of his substance abuse issues.
Yeah, exactly.
But the atmosphere of that novel is used so incredibly well, like the snow and everything, and like how much it isolates the family from everyone, and then begins to like drive Jack slowly but surely crazier, essentially, is so incredibly like well done in the novel. Like you really feel it while you're reading it. Everything to do with the property and what it does, like the whole hotel itself and like the atmosphere that it creates, everything to do with the exterior of the hotel. There's a whole thing with a maze. There's like a big maze outside.
The hedge maze.
That's so crazy. That comes into play multiple times throughout the course of the novel as well. I mean, like a lot of people will kind of be aware of that because obviously like Stanley Kubrick really famously made the film, which was out in 1980, I think.
Something like that.
With Jack Nicholson.
That Stephen King hated.
Yeah, Stephen King hates
because it did not represent what the novel was about or the underlining themes.
Which like really, it's true that I will say, like, it's an incredibly well-made film, obviously, but yes, if you watch it, I guess, aware of, like, what the actual purpose of the novel was, it doesn't. It's a pretty straight horror film about a man going crazy in a hotel and attacking his family. Like, it's pretty straightforward in that way. There isn't much, like, hidden under the surface in that capacity. Exactly, so I can see why, like, particularly because this was obviously a very personal novel for him to write, that he wouldn't have been too happy. Yeah,
well, the miniseries that he has remade since, which is quite a bit longer, is actually a lot better.
Yeah, that was one that was out in like the 90s or something.
Something like that, yeah. There's like three episodes. I guess.
Well, if it was like movies? A miniseries. Yeah, well, miniseries were so different back in the day, weren't they? Because they were like over a weekend and there would be like an episode a day. It was like a TV special.
Yeah, exactly.
That they would be doing. It was very different than what you see as a miniseries now, which is one season of like 8 to 10 episodes. It's not the same.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, I think he definitely participated in the screenplay of it.
Much more, I think,
he likes that one better just because it represents the novel so much more.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, moving on, because we could talk about The Shining for a whole episode, obviously. So there's other types of stories like The Terror by Dan Simmons, which actually we did, Sharina and I did a whole episode about The Terror during our historical fiction month last year. Where we chatted through this at the first season of the show. The Terror basically is a fictionalized retelling of the Lost Franklin expedition in the mid-1840s, when there was a lot of unexplored areas in the Northwest Passage for trade routes, and so there was
they were trying to find the passage.
They were trying to find the passage so that they could find easy travel, essentially, for trading. And so there was a very large contingent. There were two ships that left Scotland, if I'm not mistaken, in 1845, and unfortunately wound up getting stuck essentially in the passage somewhere near the Northwest Territories, is my understanding. And then the crew all proceeded to die slowly but surely. And there's a lot of mystery around it because, of course, there's, eventually when the ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, were recovered and found, there was like no one left on board, even bodies.
Yeah, that's
Everyone at that point it seemed as though people had taken off, and there were all kinds of different ideas about, like, was there cannibalism involved potentially in order for some of them to survive? Like, sort of there were a lot of ideas that were posited. Some folks had taken off and died, I guess, en route to try to find help. Like, there were so many different aspects of things. But basically the novel, The Terror, that Dan Simmons wrote, he did a ton of research for it. And you can really tell. So I have not read it, but we watched the show.
Yeah, it was a great show.
It's a really
very
good show.
Good.
It was very good. Like a little slow moving there, so you have to expect that, but it's also historical fiction, so you kind of roll with that, I find. But very, like, there's something about the atmosphere of that story that's, like, very unsettling, because it, of course, also posits the idea of a supernatural entity that exists within the sort of barren, icy landscape that they are finding themselves in, essentially. That, the novel posits, like, maybe took out the crew and things like that, just to add, like, that kind of, like, fictional element to it.
That's it. The supernatural element.
Exactly, that's it, which is interesting, which is also based in indigenous folklore as well, that particular creature and stuff. I had done, like, some reading into it and everything when we rewatched the season for our episode. But yeah, I don't know, I felt like when we were, I think the crew did a really good job on the TV show too, because I felt like when we were watching it, I was like, I can feel that they're cold and uncomfortable all the time. You know what I mean? Like, you're just like, oh God, like, it's just, like, you're just watching it and you're like, God, they have like no layers on and they're all like outside and it's freezing and it seems horrible.
It's also like a wooden boat, basically. Like, there's no insulation there.
And like, we didn't have the kinds of technology and the kinds of things and insulation that we have now, right? So like, God, it must have been awful. Just life in general must have been a lot harder in the mid 1800s, I would think. Okay, the next one on my list is actually one that I read a year or two ago. I can't remember. But it's called Near the Bone by an author named Christina Henry. And it is, again, one that kind of uses the wintry sort of isolation as a bit of a metaphor for domestic violence in a way. So just be aware of that if you're reading it, obviously, because it does follow a young woman in her 20s, I think, who is living up again in the mountains with her husband, who won't talk about him because it'll give too much about the story away, but things are not good. And she lives a very simple, very non-technology based life, even though this is modern set, this novel. Yeah. And things begin to change for her when she starts to notice certain things to do with perhaps a creature in the woods of some sort, combined with 3 hikers who kind of happen to stumble upon where her area where she lives is basically, and a mystery begins to put itself together that maybe indicates that there is a reason that she's all the way up there with her husband, totally away from everybody, and she has to rediscover certain aspects of herself and kind of come to terms with things.
Oh, interesting.
But there is also a creature that is killing people up there. So.
Okay, that's an interesting juxtaposition of the winter snow isolation element with, from what I understand, you said it's an abusive relationship.
Yes.
So like the isolation of an abusive relationship as well as...
And how it isolates you from everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it juxtaposed with the whole winter element that, you're far away and everything can't reach anyone. That is very interesting. It's it's smart. Yeah,
I will say it wasn't, I think like the ending I was a little like, okay, fine, sure about. So it didn't quite turn out the way I thought it was going to, but honestly it was well written, and like you are, uncomfortable for like large portions of things. You feel it, like you feel what she's dealing with as you're reading the novel, which was interesting. Oh, yeah. Okay, there's always something like At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft, which is a pretty famous novella of his, like short story or novella. I don't know what it's actually classified as, basically, which is about an expedition into the Antarctic, in which, that's it, as per Lovecraft things in general, the crew who are doing this stumble upon ancient, dormant, otherworldly creatures.
Right, of
basically.
course.
They're always hidden somewhere, and then they accidentally get woken up and stuff. It's a very big Lovecraft trope that you kind of like see over and over again. I read it. God, I read it years ago, so I have like trouble remembering specifics about it. It was creepy, definitely. It's not very long, so it's very easy to get through. And I know that there have been talks about it for like ages of somebody like adapting it or whatever. Guillermo del Toro was going to do it for a long time, but they had like a scrapped project. I think he released sketches, like preliminary sketches he'd put together ages ago of what he kind of wanted it to look like. It probably would have been cool because like Guillermo del Toro is pretty good with creature stuff. I think people are aware of that, but I don't know. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. And I mean, like, to an extent, I don't have too much of an issue with that. Like, while I can appreciate a lot of classics and ideas of stories like Lovecraft stuff and what they bring to the table and everything, the man was like notoriously insanely racist. And so,
Nice.
So there are some times where I'm like, I don't know, do we need to keep like bringing attention to people who really like outspokenly horrible like that? Not necessarily.
Yeah, maybe not.
Not necessarily.
Maybe not.
Yeah. So.
There's one that I want to throw in.
Oh, yeah.
It's one that when we were talking about this episode in planning phase, I guess, I instantly thought about it, even though I read it so long ago. I believe you actually gave me this book for
I think I
gift.
did, eh?
Yeah, exactly. It's called Dead North, which is a collection of short stories, and it is Canadian zombie fiction.
Yeah.
So it's part of an anthology series from what I understand, but the whole thing is that a lot of this book or a lot of the stories in this book are, I mean, they're all set in Canada.
Yeah.
And they're all in the winter from what I understand, and most of them are zombie themed.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Which is actually pretty cool. There's a couple of stories in some of the major cities. And maybe one that we live in. But it was just really fun to read. Yeah. But it was just really, really fun to read that. Kind of like knowing the place, and we've traveled a little bit, so like we kind of know
that's true.
some of the places and stuff. So it was really fun to read. Also, zombies in Canada, I personally think just it wouldn't work.
I think they would freeze. I think that we'd be okay up here because I think that they would freeze in place like little icicle people, and we would be fine.
Exactly, and I think there's a couple of stories that kind of like do touch upon that, which is funny because there's some of them that are more serious stories, but some of them are like, zombie apocalypse happened in the winter, and 2 months later, I mean, most people are still alive because the zombies just froze, and we kind of just go and collect them in the streets and burn them.
You can just chop their heads off or whatever.
Exactly. It's like the easiest zombie apocalypse ever because, they all froze.
I would hope that would actually be what would happen.
I know,
I would
right?
really appreciate
that.
Well,
technically speaking, the physicality,
yes.
The zombies is still... I got it. The physicality of zombies is still the same, right? Even though they're undead.
Yes,
but they still have, muscles and fluids.
They have to be able to move. So
exactly.
Something's got to be pumping something through them. Like, that's how it has to work, right?
Well, I mean, whether the blood is still pumping or whatever it is, it's still a tissue which will still freeze if it's minus 25 and they just kind of chill on the street. So, anyways, it was an interesting one. It's a bunch of short stories. It's worth checking out.
It was edited and compiled by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who I know, actually. So she's I think a lot of people will probably be aware. Her stuff pops up online a lot now. I'm sure that when she compiled this particular collection, she may not have been as well known, but she's a Mexican-Canadian author who is famous for multiple novels at this point. Certain Dark Things, Mexican Gothic, Gods of Jade and Shadow, The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, Velvet Was the Night, Silver Nitrate. Sylvia Moreno Garcia is very big now in the horror sphere and kind of weird atmospheres and stuff like that. Personally, I've only read Mexican Gothic. It was an interesting story. I personally wasn't a huge fan of what actually turned out to be the mystery. However, it was well written and was very cool to read the style and time period in which the novel was set, which I really appreciated. So
cool.
Yeah. So
there you go.
That's it. I had slipped my mind that she's a Mexican Canadian, but that's why this is all Canadian set zombie stuff.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Dead North. Check it out.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about Misery a little bit already.
Yes.
So I will say, actually, I haven't read Misery.
Oh my God.
I've only seen the movie.
We haven't.
I know. I haven't read a bunch. I've read a bunch of them, but also have not read a bunch of them because Stephen King has a long bibliography. It would be really hard to get to all of them.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I've read a lot of them. I don't want to say most of them, but I read a lot.
So it's one of his bigger ones that I have not read. I mean, I feel like a lot of people have seen the movie, which doesn't...
was very good.
It's so good.
It does.
It's great. It does an incredible
adaptation
job.
of the book.
100%. It's a great adaptation. It does a really great job of, again, even instilling the theme of isolation and the desperation that presents itself due to that isolation for the character Paul, right?
I think so.
Yeah. The novelist who's the main character in the story is incredible. So good. And I mean, that's it. I think Kathy Bates, will forever be remembered for this role.
100%.
Because she's incredible. And that's not, it's one of those that now everybody's Kathy Bates in Misery, but really go back and watch it. She's so good. There's a reason that it's so famous.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Well, look, there's still a couple of weeks, probably months left to winter, so you can pick it up.
Yeah. I'll see if I get around to it in between other stuff. Okay, next one. So actually, this is one that was on my, when Sharina and I tend to do our top 10 list of reads at the end of the year. And I think that not for 2024, but I believe that this one was on my list for 2023 in my top reads. It's called Boys in the Valley by an author named Philip Fracassi. It is a period novel set, I think it was early 1900s, if I'm not mistaken, although I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. It's set in an all-boys orphanage that's run by, priests, essentially, out in the country. It's in the States, but it's out, it was, sort of turn of the century, so late 18, early 1900s, essentially. It's an all-boys Catholic-run orphanage, basically, where, the kids have to, do prayers and do work and stuff like that, but difficult conditions, definitely, and very strictly run, of course. It is, not to spoil too much, but it's basically a possession story, which within the Catholicism of it kind of makes sense.
At winter.
Yes.
Nice.
It's the middle of the winter season. The nearest farm to the orphanage is, miles and miles away, right? They can get to it, but you should take a wagon to get there kind of thing. It's quite far. And a person's injured and arrives, I won't give away too much, but a person is sort of injured and arrives at the orphanage in need of assistance but is also basically possessed, essentially. And it's that entity that's overtaken him kind of creeps out and begins to infect the boys in the orphanage and then like the adults and stuff like that there. And then so there's a turning of one faction against another, and they have to fight against one another and try to find a way sort of desperately to get out when they really have no help nearby at all. So it's like several of the boys needing to band together and stuff. It's like it's very, again, one of those that I found like the cold sort of iciness of it because of the weather was very well like written into the story, woven into like the actual tale itself, because you are like uncomfortable for these kids because it's all told, like it's got multiple VOVs, but it's told from different kids' perspectives, some of the adults as well, but from multiple kids' perspectives, and just like the kids talking about how hungry they are, how cold they are, all of these things over and over again. You can't help but just be like, oh my God, like halfway through the novel you're like, Jesus, like
I need a snack.
Like you're like, God, I need like a blanket and like tea or something just to make myself feel better. But it was it's very dark. There's a lot of like really dark subject matter in it. It's quite sad. But it's a very well-written book, and it's very atmospheric. It's quite creepy, honestly. Like, possessed kids are scary, right? And a lot of stuff.
Oh,
so,
my God. Seriously.
So it's definitely one of those. Yeah, you would hate it. You would be like, oh, God, I don't like this. But, yeah, it was that was a really good one. There's, obviously, Let Me In, which I know a lot of people on this side of the world know as Let the Right One In because of the change that they made for the movie. It's a Swedish novel, isn't it?
Yep.
Swedish or Danish? I don't remember. I'm sorry. Set, of course, that's it in, again, like snowy conditions in Scandinavia. Because I love that. I feel like people think that Scandinavia is only cold for the entire year and they have no summer, because I feel like every like movie or adaptation that we get is all winter set. Every time we see something new, I'm like, and it's cold. There it is. It's like everything's set here. It's like, oh, and it's cold outside.
Most of the time, seriously.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a young boy who befriends a girl who lives in the same like apartment building that he does, and slowly but surely starts to realize that she's a little weird for a very specific reason. And I mean, like, I think we know. I don't think I'm spoiling too much by saying it's a vampire novel. You've never seen the movie or anything? No. Oh, wow. It's really good. I know they did an American version of the film as well, which I have not watched. I've actually only watched the original movie, which is very good. It's very quiet. Everything's from the perspective of the kids, so it's like there's like confusion almost as you're watching some parts of it because the child is confused,
right?
And so you are confused,
right? That's it. Oh, that's cool.
Until he kind of starts to grasp like what's happening to a degree, but like it's very stark. You know, blood on snow, that kind of thing.
Of course, nice.
But it's very well done, and the story is definitely an interesting one for sure. Yeah, it's like a very popular story. I know, so I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir if people are here, but it's a good one.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's check it out. My God.
Yeah, you've not. I can't believe. I just assumed you'd seen it. Oh, okay. Yeah.
I know it. Like, I've heard the name before.
Yeah. I've even heard that apparently like the American film's actually pretty good as well. So I haven't watched it, but yeah.
The double feature.
Yeah, that's it. One and the other, and then compare them and see how we feel about it. And then of course there's something again in the vampire sphere. There's something like 30 Days of Night.
Yeah, that one I've seen.
Yeah,
that one's good.
Yeah, so I know that's a graphic novel that's very, very famous. I believe, right? Like I think it was pretty famous before it was even adapted, right?
I think so.
And that one, of course, takes place in Alaska. And it's set in a small town in which that's it. Basically, which I think this is a thing in some parts of the world where they do have periods of the year in which for X number of time the sun never rises for them. Like they never see the sunrise, so it just stays dark for weeks at a time.
Yeah. It's insane that this happens.
Yeah,
I don't know how people survive.
It must be tough.
It must be so insane. Yeah. And there's actually something that I discovered recently. At least to my knowledge, there is a town in the mountains somewhere. I don't know, somewhere in Norway or whatever it is. Anyways, but for a certain part of the year, and I'm not even sure if it's for the majority of the year, but because of the town's position, which is basically at the bottom between two mountains.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I think it's for a decent part of the year. The sun, they just don't see the sun because it doesn't rise high enough for it to go over the mountain. So they have a contraption of literally giant mirrors that reflect the sun into the town. That's how crazy it is.
That sounds made up. Like, that doesn't sound real.
No, seriously, it's a thing.
Wow.
They have some kind of sun, whatever it is. They have giant mirrors that reflect the sun into the town.
Okay, just to help them get...
Yeah, exactly. Vitamin D and all that stuff.
God.
Like, that's mental. And people live there. And it's not like a little random town with 10 people in little wooden shacks. No, it's like a modern town.
Wow.
They have roads. And
Like,
it looks very nice.
Like, it's not what you think it is. It's not like a little mountain town in Tibet where people live in shacks.
It's a modern enough town. It's like, it's nice. The views are nice, but no sun.
Wow.
No direct sun, sorry.
That's crazy. Oh, God, I can't even imagine. But yeah, that would have an effect on you after a while.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, 30 Days of Night is one of those that I find is like maybe a little underrated that way because what a clever idea. Right?
Yeah.
Like if you had a faction of something like vampires, for instance, that we, very historically know that's their whole thing. That's a big trope. They can't go out in the sun. Mm-hmm. What a clever thing to do is to give them the opportunity to be like, yeah, well, we're going to go to this place where we have weeks to a month.
Yeah.
In which we can reap carnage and basically get all the food and turn all the people that we want for that entire period of time. And they have no reprieve. Like, it's so often in vampire stories, the characters are all talking to each other and they're like, we just have to make it till sunup.
We have to make it through the night.
But what do you do when you can't make it to sunup because you're like, yeah, that's in a month. Like, what does that mean? How long am I meant to make this work? It's a very clever idea.
It's very smart vampires.
Super smart. So smart. Good job, guys. I think maybe it's also because it's probably also because like the movie's not great.
It's okay. Like, it has good action. It has good vampires and like
the vampires look cool.
Yeah,
but
the color palette is cool.
Yeah.
I did not like the ending.
It's not very well. I will say like it's not very well executed. Like a lot of the dialogue's clunky. Some of the performances are like okay. Like it looks cool and
That's
it had and it's such an interesting story that I think it had a lot of potential to like be good, but they just kind of really didn't do very much with it. It was also, I think it's like mid 2000s or late 2000s, so it was also out in that period of time where I guess we didn't really care if we were making a good adaptation.
Yeah, no, not much.
They were just kind of doing it. So, and then being like, it's fine, it looks cool, it's violent, people will come and see it, and I'm sure they were correct.
It was kind of like grungy and stuff too, so.
Yeah, and like you said, exactly, like the vampires look cool, they have like razor teeth.
Yeah,
and stuff, they look like sharks. And like, that's it, and like it's got like a decent amount of action and stuff in it, but they don't give you enough time for anything, like I don't really care about any of the characters, you're not really attached to anyone, you're like, whatever, so like the stakes feel low when you're watching it, which I think doesn't help very much. But I'd be interested if ever like it were like redone or something and they actually like gave it, even if you did like a 3 or a 4 episode like mini series out of it, it would probably be good, right? Because you like get an opportunity to like feel, because I feel like with that one too, when I watched the film, I don't feel the cold in the same way that I do with some of the other ones that we've seen. You don't feel that isolation as much and that's how you can just, what's the mark of like a good film, right? Is that like if it's well made, you feel like you're there, but you don't, I find, when you're watching this movie.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I agree.
Anyway, God, there are others, obviously. There are many other ones as well. We could go on and on, but this is just like kind of like a small sampling, I guess, of some like winter set horror stories that just like kind of really tap into like those types of emotions, and they make you uncomfortable along with the characters, they make you tense along with the characters, they make you cold, they make you begin to feel isolated to an extent as well, which is just the mark of a good story, is that you're so immersed in it that you feel like the characters feel at any given time, which is great.
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely check those out. If wherever you are it is cold and or snowing,
we feel
both.
you. Just know that we're here in solidarity. It is also cold and terrible here right now. Anyway, I'd be really curious though if people have like recommendations, like if you have like winter horror books that you love. I would love to I love to be able to just like pile up at this time of year with like different types of stories that I've never come across before. I love that. So anyway, you can let us know all about that over on all of our social media, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, Fully Booked CA. Just, search for us, I guess. And feel free to definitely continue to check out the website all throughout the month of February, as well as we have new content being published on a regular basis. Yay, us.
Yeah. And if you want to subscribe to the newsletter.
Yeah, do that.
Fullybooked.ca/newsletter.
Yeah, go do that because, this one's working really hard on it. So we like it when people see that stuff. But anyway, until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Ciao, guys.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.